The history of slavery in the United States is dark and heinous, filled with inconceivable crimes against slaves. Among the most vulnerable victims were enslaved women who suffered untold horrors during pregnancy. In this video, we will highlight their complex lives, the challenges they faced, and the effect this had on both mother and child. The transatlantic slave trade began in the early 1600s when the first enslaved Africans were brought to Jamestown, Virginia in 1619. Initially, slavery was based not on race, but on captivity, where people taken captive were sold into slavery regardless of race. However, as slavery became more profitable, laws were implemented to ensure that enslaved Africans remained in bondage for life and that future generations could inherit their status as slaves. By the 1800s, slave breeding became a profitable business. Slave owners established breeding farms and houses nationwide to facilitate this cruel practice. One infamous breeding farm was owned by none other than Thomas Jefferson, a founding father of the United States who owned over 600 slaves, many of whom he bred like animals. Despite his words proclaiming that all men are created equal, Jefferson showed no remorse in using enslaved women for breeding purposes. These women endured the physical toll of forced labor and the emotional burden of carrying a child in captivity. Pregnant enslaved women lived in constant fear and anxiety, not knowing what fate awaited them and their unborn children. They faced physical abuse, neglect, and a lack of primary health care, leaving them vulnerable to life-threatening complications during childbirth. Some enslavers even practiced infanticide, robbing enslaved women of the chance to raise their own children. Sadly, the trauma experienced by enslaved women during pregnancy had long-lasting effects. Post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, was a common consequence of the abuse and suffering they endured, affecting their mental health and relationships. These women were also subjected to cruel and dangerous birthing practices that often resulted in injury, infection, and death. Denied access to proper medical care and pain relief, they were forced to give birth on plantation floors without assistance. Some were even subjected to the barbaric practice of the breaking of the pelvis, a painful procedure intended to widen the birth canal. These practices caused long-term physical disabilities and immense suffering. The horrors did not end with childbirth. Enslaved women were denied the fundamental right to care for their children. These innocent babies were considered the property of their white masters and were often taken away from their mothers as soon as they were weaned. Sold off to other plantation owners, these children grew up without the love and care of their biological parents, subjected to back-breaking labor from a young age. This heart-wrenching practice of separating enslaved mothers from their children was widespread throughout the South and was even codified into law. In Virginia, a law passed in 1662 stated that the status of a child was determined by the status of its mother, ensuring that even if a child's father were a free man, if its mother was a slave, the child would be born into slavery. Among the countless stories of suffering, Harriet Jacobs stands out as a symbol of resilience and survival. Enslaved in North Carolina, Harriet was forced into a sexual relationship with her owner, resulting in pregnancy. Fearing that her child would be taken away from her, she made a courageous decision to escape and hide in a small attic space for 7 years, watching her children grow up without her. What could be more horrible than this? Enslaved women on breeding farms were also used as subjects for medical experiments and surgeries. Doctors, including Dr. James Marion Sims, considered the father of modern gynecology, experimented on enslaved black women without anesthesia or consent. Sims believed that black women did not experience pain in the same way as white women, further dehumanizing these already vulnerable women. Furthermore, enslaved women had no say in their reproductive rights. Slave owners dictated when they would bear children, often forcibly impregnating them to increase the number of slaves on the plantation. All inclusive, we must take something away from this tragic period of history because of the lasting effect slavery has had on modern society. Let's give it a wrap. But before signing off, do subscribe to our channel and like the video for more such interesting stories.